Okay, now we're recording. Now you tell me about yourself.
Hello, I'm Ron Eden, and I raced midgets and sprint cars for probably 30 years. And much of that was at the Speedrome. When I started racing, I came from Iowa, and there was a lot of racing in Indiana. I just moved here. When I was 27 years old, I decided to go to a race. So I went to the race. I think it was at the Speedrome, and I thought, hey, that looks like fun. So rather than just sit there and watch it, I thought I'd do it. Now at that stage of the game, I knew absolutely nothing to speak of about racing. But I got a couple of old cronies, and of course all three of us weren't so old then, and we took an old 1950 Chevy, started tearing it apart and put some roll bars in it and threw out all the seats and everything else and put something in there that probably wasn't safe at all, and we went racing. And the first race I ever ran in my life was at the Speedrome. And at the Speedrome, it was fun, it was great, and it was 50 miles from home. It was a good sport, you know, and to go out there and try to beat those other guys, that was what was so neat about it. Well, my very first race was a figure eight, because that's what they had at the Speedrome there. So I entered the figure eight, and I was doing halfway decent, not so bad, and then all at once, whoops, somebody hit me, and there I sit in the middle of the crossroads. And then this is a big race in length, not a big race in money, but in length. So I sat there probably at least 10 laps, and all at once, we got a little background noise, but that's just people having fun at a party. So all at once, after 10 laps of sitting there and trying to hit the starter to get out of the road and everything else I could think of, I look in the mirror and I see one car passing another one behind me, and I know what's going to happen. And it did, and that was the end of my first race. Now, I made a lot of money in that race. In those days, I think it cost us about $6 to get in the pits. And I got a third of my money back. My total prize money for that day was $2.50. So, but I loved it. So we fixed that car up and went back, and that was my start to racing. Then as time went by, I got into midgets instead of stock cars because they just looked like a lot more fun. And I raced midgets here and there, and then found out that they were racing at the Speedrome, so obviously that's where I'm going to go. So at the Speedrome, I'm going to say roughly 1971 probably, I joined a club called Cora. Now I had been, let's see, backwards a little bit, because I joined the club of Cora probably in 72. But in 71 I was racing just outlaw here and there and so on. And then I joined Cora in 72. Then I joined USAC in 73. One club wouldn't let you race with the other club because they were always fighting each other. So they put out a deal that you got fined if you raced with the other club. Well, I got fined $100 by each club because I was going to race where I wanted to race. And I did. So in those days, you couldn't even bring a woman into the pits. That's how long ago that was. No women or kids allowed in the pits at all. So then as time went by, I ran some USAC, and then I decided Cora's much closer to home. The Cora cars, I'm sorry to say, were a little easier to beat. And with USAC, there'd be 25 good cars there. With Cora, there'd be 5 good cars there. And so I decided to go with Cora. And I won many, many races at the Speedrome. I wish I could remember how many. I don't know. But I do contend that I might have won more features at the Speedrome than anybody else. The other one that it could be, who holds the record, is Rich Vogler, because Rich ran a lot of USAC races there, and he always won. Once I was in the lead there, I think it was a 50-lap race, maybe 100, and I got up to first. Rich Vogler got up to second, and I saw that red car out of my eye. I thought, uh-oh. So, man, I came out of 4 on a yellow, and I just tromped her down because I was going to beat that Rich. Well, I tromped a little bit too far. The car slid just a hair, and Rich passed me. I got second. He was good. Now let's see, what else can we talk about with racing?
Well, we're going to talk about why there were more cars wanting to race as Cora than they did as USAC.
That's right. You know, there were an awful lot of midgets around, and this was the start of the decline, I'll say, of purses, because there just wasn't enough money to go around to everybody. And at the Speedrome, we'd typically have $100 to win, and in USAC, it'd typically be $250 or $300 to win, okay? A significant difference. However, Cora, again, those guys are a little bit easier to beat. Now, at the Speedrome, the midgets were kind of going downhill. They weren't doing all that great. So Cora, which was not owned by anybody, it was a club, but Ed Adair was the man. Ed Adair took it under his wings. He's the one that really made Cora. He'd go out and get the races, and that's what it took. With the exception of one time when Ron Eden and John Stiles got together at John Stiles' home and made up a contract for 20 races for that year. And that was a very, very good year. But when the midgets were kind of declining, along came this guy named John Mahoney. And John Mahoney hooked up with Ed Adair, John Crucian, and Mahoney and Crucian. Yeah, I got it now. And Mahoney and Crucian were two super nice guys. John was a good photographer as well as a good speaker. And they decided the three of them would put on a race at the Speedrome. And they made a deal, I think with John Stiles, maybe, was it?
$25 a car, above and below $30.
Yeah. So they made a deal where they had X number of dollars, and above like 25 or something.
30 cars.
Above 30 cars, they would add, the track owner would add $25 a car. And so they made it both ways. Then if they were short cars, the Ed Adair's group had to give money back at 25. They decided, okay, they'd do that. Well, I swear Ed Adair must have gone out to every single basement in Indiana, because here USAC had been having 6 to 10 cars at the races, and along came 47 midgets to the Crucian, Mahoney, John Stiles, Ed Adair deal. And wow, they did well. Cut.
Now tell us about what it was like to be a race driver out of a midget coming to the Speedrome, and a day in the life of that midget driver in 65, 66, or 76, and 75, 76. You know, what was it like to be a driver of a midget and come to 50 miles away from home and race?
Okay, a variety of people. For example, you can imagine that if you've read any books, that the Unzers and the Andrettis and the Foyts did nothing but race. Well, I didn't have that talent or that name, so I couldn't do that. I had to be a businessman to earn enough money to race the race car. So I went to college, got a good job so I could save some money, And then bought a race car. That's when I bought the old 1950 Chevy. And then bought a midget, and then bought another midget. And now here I am racing midgets, right? But I don't have the crew or the money that these big shots have. But I still loved it, and every race day, which would be every weekend, and sometimes 1, 2, or 3 races on a weekend, Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday, I would have my guy, whoever that guy was at the moment, and I only had one pit crew member, and he would clean the car up, make sure the bolts and nuts are tight, and that's all we did. And then I would go pick him up, and I'd load the race car, and this was after a day of work at whichever job I had at the moment. So work all day, and then you hop in the car and go out and pick up your mechanic, pick up the race car, and off to the Speedrome again. Now luckily the Speedrome only being an hour and a half away wasn't really too bad. And of course we'd always get home at 1 o'clock in the morning or later, and that was half of the fun.
What happened when you got to the Speedrome? You brought that car to the Speedrome on a trailer?
Yep, we would transport our car on a, I think it was a 4-wheel trailer, but it had no enclosure. It was wide open, and I'm not sure that wasn't a good thing because all the people and all the kids would see the race car. Now later when they started getting the hotsy-totsy good, nice, great haulers, had a kitchen in them and all that good stuff, well, that's all convenient and nice, but it didn't bring any fans to the racetrack, you know, so it hurt just a little bit. A lot of things that made it good, and a few things that made it not so good.
What happened when you got to the racetrack? How did things go when you drove in the pit gate or drove in the gates of the racetrack? What happened there?
Well, luckily I became one of the old timers early. In other words, since I was there every week, I got to know everybody, from the owner to the announcer, and so that was good because everybody would see me and they'd just say hi and just keep driving on in, stop and pay your, I'd probably gone up to $8 or $10 by now at least, and then I'd go park and find a decent place to park because I only had one crew member and he was pushing the car while I was getting my clothes on, so I had to be reasonably close to the racetrack. So we'd park there and then we'd undo the latches on the trailer, push the car off, and we're ready to race. Oftentimes though, and this was a difference in myself and a lot of the racers also, I'd get to the racetrack and I hadn't changed anything from the last racetrack except wash it. That's all we did, you know, and because didn't have time, so pick her up and go. And so we'd have to change tires and change the weight a little bit, and I knew pretty well where to set things. And my mechanic was a great guy. They called him Foxy. He was a good one. Foxy always came along and did the work, and every year he'd say, "Hey, you guys round doubled my salary again. I'm up to 4 zeros now." We had a good time. And then, of course, we'd push it on the racetrack when it was our turn to come out for a heat race. And that was our night of racing. Oh, I do remember one thing, though. It was John Stiles put on a great 500-lap race. And his very first one, I think he might have been like Ed Adair looking in the basements. I'm not sure, because he called me up about an hour before the race was to start. I'd put the car in the garage after the last race, didn't do anything to it yet. John said, "Ron, we need cars, a little short." I hadn't planned on coming, 500 laps, a lot of wear and tear in the car. I was busy, so I hadn't planned on coming, but I said, "Okay, I'll be there." So we rushed out and ran to the garage, loaded up the car, went over and got in there, and everybody was practicing already. And I had dirt tires on for the asphalt track. So I said, "Foxy, change those tires." We changed the tire and we went out and we were running decent at lap about 480. And I want to tell you, if you've run 480 laps at Speedrome, you are exhausted. There is no time to rest at Speedrome. You turn the whole track in 9 seconds, you know. At a big track like Half Mile Winchester, you got time to rest going down the backstretch. No time to rest here. I was so exhausted it was hard to get out of the car. But the camshaft broke, so I was done at lap 480.
Tell me about being at the Speedrome after that period of time. You had a daughter that raced, right?
Yes, I did. When she was just a very little girl, probably 10 years old, she started coming with me, and she enjoyed it more than the others, the other kids. And she would get in the pits whenever she could, and then the pit age rose enough that stayed a little bit ahead of her, so she could always come. And then I have pictures of her learning to race, and she's just right there, you know, with her hands on all the way. And she and I would think alike. I think I needed a 5/8 wrench, and she'd hand it to me. It was pretty neat, and not that I'm a mechanic, because I'm not. That's why Foxy was there. But Sandy then, of course, wanted to race. Well, so I'm trying to think of where she came across her first go-kart, and I can't remember, but I think she bought one, a go-kart, a cheap one, obviously. And we had go-kart track in our hometown of Crawfordsville. So she went racing, then I had a heart problem. So I had to really knock off. I couldn't race anymore. But before that, while I was racing, she'd stay home on occasions. The only occasions she stayed home was when there was a go-kart race. And pretty soon I started figuring out, whenever there's a go-kart race that way, and I'm that way, Sonny takes a go-kart herself. She wasn't old enough to drive yet on the street, so she'd load it up herself. She'd get a friend of hers to help her drive, so they'd drive legal over to the racetrack, and then she'd race the go-kart. So she loved it. So then she worked into midgets, she worked into USAC, and she was, and still is at this point, the only woman to ever have won a USAC championship. So that's pretty nice.
That was at the Speedrome.
Yes, that was at the Speedrome.
And 40 years before, when you started, women weren't even allowed in the pit area.
That is correct. Women and kids could not come in the pits at all. And I was kind of surprised, because I think they'd want to take that $6.
Okay, we got a couple minutes. Is there anything else you want to add to your life at the Speedrome and the
Oh,
Speedrome?
yes, so much. But somebody might goof, and it might be before 100 years that somebody sees it.
Well, that's all right. I'm sure there are other... You worked as an official there, didn't you?
The camera's off, isn't it?
Huh?
Camera's off, isn't it?
No.
What?
You worked as an official.
Yes, I did. Then after I retired, John Stiles, super guy, he had bought the racetrack, and he wanted a crew, so he got myself to be the director of speed, I think, and Tom Hayworth to be the chief mechanic to check every car out, make sure it's good. Then we had a flagman and one or two other guys. So yeah, then I was on the crew. As a matter of fact, John Stiles helped me so much in pleasure with Speedrome, and little tidbits like this are fun. He gave me a magazine one day. Couldn't read it. Started looking at the back. It was obviously written from the back to the front. I thought, what is this? There's a picture of me, and I'm standing there going like this. And I'm on the track, standing there. The midgets are all behind me. Don't have any idea what I'm saying or what, because there's captions. Okay? So I put that in my file, and I would say 5 or 6 years later, there was a Japanese guy staying at my motel, and he spoke both languages, and I said, "Hey, you got a minute? Come to my office." He said, "Sure." So he came to my office, I got that magazine out, and I said, "Can you read this?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Good. What am I saying here?" He said, "You're saying, whoa, hold up." So I enjoyed that picture. Just think, I was famous in Japan.
Right.